All right. Good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started tonight. I want to thank you for joining us this evening, tonight for this virtual program. My name is Pat Kane, Public Programs Visitor Services Coordinator here at the Museum of the Grand Prairie, a cultural and natural history museum in Mahomet, Illinois, here in Champaign County, right here in Central Illinois. And we are here tonight to have an awesome virtual program, awesome virtual event. I want to especially thank Dr. Kyle Ciani for joining us tonight to present what is sure to be a really awesome and engaging program. Titled the program, From the Lobby to the Street, Strategies Used by Voting Activists in the Early 20th Century. We'll get to that program in a few moments, where I will turn the stage over to Dr. Ciani. But I want to go over a few things before we get there. We would love to know where you're watching from tonight. Write it down in the comment section below. Always love to see where you're watching from. Have a few folks already tuning in and writing that. Barb is watching from Champaign. Sarah is tuning in from West Chicago. Thank you so much for writing that. And thank you so much for tuning in. Would love to know where the rest of you are watching from tonight, so write that down in the comment section below. I'm streaming live from the Museum of the Grand Prairie with our newest special exhibit right behind me, How Long Must Women Wait? Women's Suffrage and Women's Rights in Champaign County. Also, I want to encourage you to click that share button, share that stream so you can watch alongside your friends and make this as engaging as possible for everyone. Enjoy yourselves tonight with this virtual program and learn a thing or two as well. Also, should you have any questions for us during the program, write those down in the comment section and we'll answer those questions towards the end of the program. Also, let us know if there's any audio or video issues and we can address those if they happen to pop up. A little bit about us. Museum of the Grand Prairie opened in 1968 as the Early American Museum, and our current mission is to collect, preserve, and interpret the cultural and natural history of Champaign County and East Central Illinois. We're part of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, a collection of forest preserves, educational facilities such as our museum here, and the Homer Lake Interpretive Center on the other side of the county that handles mostly environmental education, but a number of other things. Also have a golf course, multi-purpose Kickapoo Rail Trail, and a whole bunch else part of the district. Today's program is tied to this newest exhibit that I already mentioned, How Long Must Women Wait? Women's Suffrage and Women's Rights in Champaign County. This exhibit opened back in March to help commemorate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment's ratification to the United States Constitution. This exhibit explores the women's suffrage movement locally and nationally as only one landmark in a long continuing struggle for women and other marginalized people to claim an equal role in society. If you haven't come out to see it yet, if you're in the area, register for a time to come and visit us, or you can check out virtual tours on our Facebook and YouTube pages. This special exhibit speaker series is made possible with support from independent donors, as well as the following women-owned and/or women-led businesses and organizations: Campfire Concepts, ShambannaMoms.com, 5 Foot Productions, Guth & Associates, LLC, Jessie Marie Studio, LLC, the McGuire Home Collection, Organizing CU, Paige Roasting Company, Simply Anchored Boutique, and the Right Start Preschool. Be sure to visit these local businesses or their websites and help support these great people who are helping support this speaker series. I would also like to note that we did offer Dr. Ciani an honoraria to speak this evening, but she actually donated those funds back to us for the program tonight, so she's donating her time tonight. So many thanks to her for doing that, as I know that her time is very valuable. So we greatly appreciate that. A few other items I wanted to let you know about. The museum is now open on a limited basis. We're open Tuesdays through Saturdays, 1 to 5 p.m., but we do ask that you pre-register before visiting, wear a mask, and follow other safety protocols while you visit. Visit our website or Facebook page to learn how to register. Also got a whole bunch of great digital content on our social media pages that we've been pumping out, especially over the past few months since the pandemic hit. Things such as stories of local history, pieces from our museum's collection, virtual programs, virtual concerts, and much, much more. So find us either on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, or our Goodreads pages. Another series we have is titled Soloist for Suffrage. We have one remaining concert in that series. This concert series features performers who perform right behind me, who are solo female local artists who perform intimate acoustic sets, and they stream live on our Facebook and YouTube pages, much like this program is tonight. And on October 15th, Lizzie Roars will join us from 7 to 8:30 p.m. for what is sure to be another awesome virtual concert. Last thing to promote, the next event in this special exhibit speaker series, and it's also part of our 14th annual Lincoln Lecture Series, is going to happen on Sunday, October 4th at 2 p.m., again live on our Facebook and YouTube pages, where Christina Hartlieb, who is the executive director of the Harriet Beecher Stowe House in Cincinnati, will present the program Harriet Beecher Stowe, The Road to Anti-Slavery Advocate. So check out that program again on October 4th, streamed live on our Facebook and YouTube pages. If you want more information, find our websites or us on social media. Got a whole bunch of stuff that you can explore there. I want to encourage you again to let us know where you're watching from. Carol has said that she's watching from Bloomington. Thanks for tuning in, Carol. And click that share stream button so you can watch alongside your friends as well. Another thing, if you have any questions for Dr. Ciani during the program, please write those down in the comment section below. I will be moderating the chat as that happens, and we'll answer those towards the end of the presentation. Now I'm really excited to turn it over to our special guest today, Dr. Kyle Ciani, who I'm really glad to see her again, as well as join us for the program. Kyle Ciani is Associate Professor of History and Core Faculty Member for the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program at Illinois State University. Her research, teaching, and service interests revolve around the diverse histories of gendered wage earning and social reform in the United States. And she focused on these issues in her book, Choosing to Care, 100 Years of Child Care and Social Reform in San Diego, 1850 to 1950. Ciani is involved with efforts by museum professionals at the national level to provide more realistic visions of historical movements, regularly consults with K-12 districts in Illinois on how to integrate the histories of women and girls into social studies curriculums, and is an active member of the McLean County League of Women Voters. She earned her PhD in the history of women and gender from Michigan State University and MA and BA degrees in history from the University of San Diego. I've had the pleasure of getting to take a few of Dr. Ciani's classes, one as an undergrad at Illinois State University, one as a graduate student at Illinois State, and learned so much, not only about history, but how to become a better writer, reader, thinker, and human being overall. Aside from her talent and passion as a historian, activist, and writer, she is a phenomenal mentor to her students. I know that she cares deeply about her students, and it's evident in the teaching of her classes. And I really, really enjoyed each one of the classes that I had to take, that I got to take with her. And I'm really happy to see her again tonight, as I already mentioned, and to have her join us on the virtual stage. So enough of me talking, and I will turn it over to Dr. Kyle Ciani. Let's give a warm virtual welcome to her.
Thanks, Pat. You were going to make me cry before I got started here.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Pat's absolutely right. He's an alum of ISU, and our history program is currently in our graduate program, and we're really proud of him and the work that he's doing at the museum. And, you know, as you've been talking, I was going to come down to the museum and take in this new special exhibit, and then, you know, COVID hit. And so I am just itching to get down there, and we'll do that soon. I wrote down Tuesday through Saturday, and I'll make sure that I get my ticket. Oh, yeah. But I've been salivating at the banner that is behind you. I'm assuming that's a local banner from someone?
Are you talking about the flag
Yeah,
at the top? That's just
yeah.
that's a remake of Suffrage
Okay,
flag, um,
okay.
with the yellow, white, and purple.
Right, right. So I was wondering if it was the real deal because I've done work with the um, Belmont Paul um, National Monument for Women's Suffrage, and they're always eager to find banners, as is the National Archives and the National Museum of American History. So I was going to tip them off that you all maybe had an original um, banner, but I won't do that. So you can keep your remake here. Pat had mentioned that they've been posting on their Facebook page, and you all have really done an excellent job, I think. I've been following it. I've been really excited by the educational materials that you've been offering. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at that Facebook page, especially if you have K through 12 online learners in your homes, or if you are an educator. I think you and your colleagues have done a really amazing job. So thank you for the opportunity, Pat, to be here tonight. I'm also really excited to see some people who I know as members of the virtual series. So I tried very hard not to steal any of their thunder. So I was originally going to talk a little bit more about political cartooning, but I'm not going to.
Oh,
Yeah, and I'll just mention some little tidbits, but I will leave that to your experts. And you've got a great program, so I hope everybody who's out there listening tonight will pop in for the rest of the speaker series. So you've done a great job with that. I'm streaming from my office at Illinois State University. And as such, I would like to acknowledge that Illinois State sits on the lands that were once home to the Illini, the Peoria, and the Miami. I want to thank the Indigenous people and their allies in our shared communities who continue to give voice to the important legacy of these nations by continuing to tell the stories of these nations' struggles for survival under the ongoing attacks against the preservation of their cultures, their language, their ways of life, and their rights to their land. And I know the Museum of the Grand Prairie recognizes Native American indigenous histories in the region, and I thank you for doing so. A note about my presentation. So I have a few slides that will come. I'm going to talk for about 25, maybe 30 minutes. And the slides will come in the second half. And I've prepared written comments because, as students like Pat will know, I can be led afield if there's a topic. He's laughing. So I did prepare some comments, and because of the way that my computer is situated, it may look as though I'm not speaking directly to you all, and I apologize in advance for that. But I wanted to make sure that I reserved time for your questions and your comments, and make sure that you write those in that chat for Pat to moderate. I may not know every answer to your question, but what I will do is, if you stump me, or if I know that there's details out there that I don't have at the top of my head, if it's okay with Pat, I don't know, can they email you, or
sure. Yeah,
or they can email me, or how should we do that?
yeah, they can if they have questions and they happen to stump you, which I think is pretty difficult to do, but it could happen. But
Yeah.
they can just message us. Either if you're watching on Facebook or watching on YouTube, you could message us there.
Okay.
Or you could call us or email us, and that information can be found on our Facebook and website.
Okay.
phone number and email.
So we'll do that. I'm going to be mentioning a few titles, some brand new research that's out there. And if you would like for me to develop a reading list, I'm happy to do that for you as well. And I've done some of that for elementary school-aged kids and some middle school, but I'm happy to do that for high school learners as well as college and just general knowledge. So I can make that happen as well. Okay. So over the last months, since the museum opened its exhibit in March, I've been so excited by the kinds of posts that the museum has put out there, because there has been real attention paid to the diversity of the suffrage movement. And I know that you all are paying attention to that. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on this evening. Like the Museum of the Grand Prairie, museums and archives across the country have been sharing their own versions of exhibitions to honor this 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Some of these include the National Women's History Museum, which is a wholly virtual site. Not just during COVID, but it's always virtual. The Library of Congress has an excellent exhibit. The National Archives has an excellent exhibit. And I want to just do a little show and tell here. The National Portrait Gallery, how do I do this? There.
There we go.
Put out a fabulous, it's just a beautifully done book, Votes for Women, by their, and it's hardbound. And the thing that I really love about it is it was put together by Kate Clark LeMay with Susan Gautier, Martha Jones, who I'm also going to recognize in a moment for her other work, and Lisa Tetreault. And it has, the National Portrait Gallery is the Smithsonian Institute. The thing that I love about this book is that it's affordable. So if you are looking for something that is a keepsake, it's a hardback, and it's just a really well done publication. For those of you who are looking for material to support your K through 12 online learners, please know that there's a lot of information out there on the suffrage movement, the long history of the suffrage movement, as well as the longer struggle for voting rights. And all of the sites, the organizations and institutions that I just mentioned, they've all been providing more and more of their materials. They are digitizing, and they are providing those digital materials to us. And you can download those. You can easily access them. If you need assistance with how to do that, their librarians and archivists are available through chat functions, or you can email them. So the virtual world of learning through museums and archives has really expanded in the last few years. And so I hope that you can, that you feel comfortable taking advantage of some of those resources. So I'm drawing from, for tonight, I'm drawing from new research of scholars who are highlighting the realities of the suffrage movement from the perspectives of activists who've long been ignored. For over 100 years, the suffrage movement has been understood through the autobiographies and historical accounts of white, middle class, and elite women who led organizations established in the 19th century. But women from Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latin American, working class communities also invested their time, talents, and financial resources into securing their rights to cast their vote. Just this month, historian Dr. Martha Jones's book, Vanguard: How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All, and I'll hold this up there. It's got a beautiful cover. And you can see my pink stickies there. I've just been enjoying so much reading this fabulous book by Professor Jones. Thank you so much for your scholarship. And I've been doing this for 20 years, and I still found much to think about and learn from this newly released book. We also have in November, Professor Kathleen Cahill's book is coming out, and that's called Recasting the Vote: How Women of Color Transformed the Suffrage Movement. And that's going to provide us with really the first comprehensive analysis of the important work of little studied activists, especially among the Native American community. So I'm really excited I've got that on pre-order, and I'm excited for that to drop on my porch in November. Museum professionals, and so, those of you out there who are like Pat, are museum professionals, you can soon expect a how-to book from Paige Harrington. Paige is a former executive director of the Belmont Paul Monument for Women's Equality in Washington, D.C. That's also the home of the archives of the National Women's Party. I'm going to be talking about that organization tonight. And her book will be a guide for ensuring that your exhibitions communicate the multiple perspectives of women's rights and their efforts, and to have that full range of people who were involved in this movement. And we hope to see that in early 2021. So as you can imagine, scholars of voting rights have used the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment as their opportunity to offer a fresh look at suffrage. And it's been very refreshing to see how their work is driven by inclusivity. They highlight leaders and organizations that seldom end up in K through 12 textbooks, but are central to our understanding of the suffrage movement. Some women carried a double burden of being a woman in Black, a woman in Native American, a woman in Asian, a woman in Latina. And under the 19th Amendment, they should have been eligible to vote, but their racialized identities often kept them from using that citizen right. Tonight, I will focus on the collective energies of two organizations whose advocacy in the early 20th century reached very different constituencies. Those organizations are the National Women's Party and the National Association of Colored Women. Now, please understand that we no longer use the term colored, but in the 1890s, this was the term adopted by this organization. I'll regularly use the acronyms NWP for National Women's Party and NACW for the National Association of Colored Women. And I'll provide a basic overview of each organization that includes some of their key strategies. I don't have time to go through all of their strategies, but I'll give you some highlights. And my goal in our short time together is to offer you some explanations for how racial identity and social status influence the way in which activists could engage in the United States. The images I'll show are in the public domain and accessible from the Library of Congress, the National Archives, the Archive of the National Woman's Party, the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum and Archive, and the New York Public Library. I've tried to bring in images that highlight elements of activism with a connection to Illinois when I could do so. Now, both the National Woman's Party and the National Association of Colored Women formed out of frustration with older and more established organizations whose agendas seemed to cave to the concerns of politicians, all of whom were men in this era. And the racist culture that ignored the specific concerns of African Americans and other oppressed communities. I'll start with the familiar National Woman's Party, which officially formed 20 years after the National Organization of Colored Women did in 1896. Many of the images regularly shown in mainstream media come from the protest organized by the NWP. So I want to emphasize how a white perspective, it always seems to come first, continues to receive coverage in spite of the NACW's efforts to secure voting rights for their communities long after the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. So I wanted to conclude with the NACW because they continue into this throughout the century. And I find it a good segue into the important work of the Black Lives Matter organization and the many organizations that are bringing voices to those who are dealing with horrific violent actions of our last summer and really of the last 20 or so years. The National Woman's Party, organized in 1916 as a result of their frustration with the much larger and better funded National Woman Suffrage Association. I apologize. The suffrage movement is alphabet soup when it comes to acronyms and names. So I'm trying hard to keep them separate for you. That organization, the National Woman Suffrage Association, that organization held a forthright stance on campaigning state by state, rather than focusing on a federal suffrage amendment. The leadership and members of both organizations were almost entirely white and middle class. And historians have documented several instances of racial exclusion by NWSA chapters across the country, really because of that exclusionary whiteness. NWP, the National Woman's Party, did recognize that women of color and working class women would benefit from universal suffrage, which the NWSA did eventually. And they invited these women to join them in public protest and lobbying their workplace sisters. However, leaders of the NWP, especially its most revered leader, Alice Paul, must also bear responsibility for the exclusion of African American women in the years leading up to its break from the National Woman Suffrage Association. And so here, folks, I'm going to share my screen. It's going to take just a minute for me to get this set up. Let me go ahead. There's a lot of buttons that I have to push here. And Pat, I'm hoping that, are we all seeing this?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right, good. So this is a very famous, so I have a few slides. You won't see me, while I'm talking, but I'm pretty sure you all will be able to hear me. So in 1913, the association organized a massive march on Washington, D.C., and Alice Paul took the lead in managing that protest. Hundreds of women from across the country descended on the nation's capital for what they hoped to be a celebration of women's ingenuity and intellect. Individual states, women's clubs, and professionals marched in groups honoring their region and contribution to the nation. And you can see in the background that some of these groups are forming. They are being led by this group of equestrian aficionados. Groups included such women dominated occupations as homemakers, textile workers, and nurses, along with university professors and artists. Alice Paul's decision to segregate one of the most important activists in U.S. history, Mrs. Ida B. Wells Barnett, from participation with the Illinois contingency at that march, and suggesting that she, along with other African American women, bring up the tail end of the march, was truly misguided. For decades, white activists have compounded that decision by simply ignoring it, which, like so many of the histories of oppressed peoples, have relegated it to the recesses of suffrage history and made it nearly invisible. Wells Barnett did not give in to Paul's decision. Along with fellow activists Virginia Brooks and Belle Squire, the three joined the State of Illinois group when it began to march. And this grainy photo was published in the Chicago Daily Tribune, honoring that March 1913 protest and these women's involvement with that protest. But we seldom see this in our textbooks, and I think that we need to start changing that. Now, the 1913 march is a presentation of its own, but one result was to move activism for suffrage into very public venues. The National Woman's Party embraced this strategy in a couple of important ways. Starting in January 1917, their silent sentinels stood outside the White House fences, each holding a large banner, sometimes throughout the night in bitter cold conditions, as a show of their strength and fortitude. This continued their direct criticism that had started a month earlier in December 2016 of President Woodrow Wilson's lack of support for their voting rights as citizens. During his annual address to Congress in December of 2016, NWP members unfurled a banner that read, quote, "Mr. President, what will you do for women's suffrage?" And they used, you can see in this bottom photograph, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" They continued to use that theme of sort of calling out Woodrow Wilson and his lack of participation and acceptance that women should be involved in, have their voting rights. By moving into the street, and especially the street in front of the White House, they took their criticism into the very public sphere. Their direct criticism of the highest political authority in the country took people by surprise and created a flurry of anti-suffrage commentary and even police action. Several NWP protesters were arrested, charged, and convicted in 1917 for civil disobedience and jailed in the Women's Workhouse at Occoquan in the state of Virginia. Again, that episode is an entire presentation, but the protests and experiences of those women generated a lot of pro-NWP support, and membership grew. Like most women's clubs and organizations of the time, the NWP connected with its membership through their weekly journal, which they named The Suffragist. Alice Paul insisted on the stories and commentary be written by NWP members, along with its production and distribution. And you can see two members here organizing the issues of The Suffragist. Paul found a very creative artist in Nina Allender, whose work is represented in the archives of the NWP. And I've had the great experience of researching. We can see many of her cartoons as digitized images on the NWP site, but I'll tell you, there's nothing like seeing and holding those original drawings. It was truly a highlight of my archival career. Another strategy that connected to the scholarly engagements of the NWP membership was their research and lobbying of congressional members. This photograph shows the cataloging of those efforts, such as the image of the card on the right-hand side of our screen. NWP members set meetings with congressional members to gauge their interest in universal suffrage and documented those responses and any other information that would be helpful in the NWP lobbying efforts. The systematic accounting of each meeting and interaction with a member of Congress produced for the NWP a data set that they used to communicate to the media, other congressional members, and organizations. The NWP is also known for tactics that seem to many people to move beyond the realm of appropriate womanly behavior. They launched automobile tours that carried the all-woman group across the country, speaking in towns large and small. They dropped suffrage pamphlets from airplanes, and they continued to gather in public protest in large cities, like this group in front of the amphitheater in Chicago. Often viewed by the general public as raucous and unladylike, the NWP did not seem to mind and kept up its relentless public campaigns through 1920. Whereas the NWP devoted all of its energies to securing the woman vote, and then it, of course, will be the leader in the efforts for the Equal Rights Amendment. The National Association of Colored Women knew it could not be so narrow in its activism because of the embedded racism in which all of their members, no matter their class positions, lived with on a daily basis. These women recognized their collective voices could offer something new to debates on segregation, discriminatory practices in workplaces, violence against African Americans, especially the violence through lynching, and the injustices of denying Black men their right to vote, which was available to them through the 15th Amendment passed in 1870. Developing out of the club movement, in 1896, this group organized out of a sense of unity toward what they referred to as racial uplift. Leaders such as educator Anna Julia Cooper and the organization's first president, Mary Church Terrell, emphasized the importance of sponsoring boys, girls, young men and women in pursuing their educations, and to support the African American family and community through their service. Cooper and Terrell demonstrate the growing numbers of African American women with college educations, as well as the expanding middle class community. And I really want to emphasize those college educations because I think that that is an element that has been ignored by the larger historical narrative of not just the suffrage movement, but history in general. Because of the negative stereotypes that often defined African American women as ignorant or promiscuous, African American men as lazy or unlawful, the NACW took as their motto, lifting as we climb, with activism toward voting rights as one mechanism to achieve that goal. The violence of lynching touched NACW leaders in personal ways. Both Ida B. Wells and Terrell are just two examples of women who had lost close friends to lynching. In their cases, men who owned stores that competed for the white dollar. And both women spoke out against the violence. Wells especially was committed to acting against the terror of mob violence through lynching, and her important pamphlet, The Red Record, documented hundreds of instances of lynching. Terrell began focusing on suffrage as an avenue toward uplift, and even joined members of the NWP when they did their White House protests. The the National Association of Colored Women's reach moved much further than its leaders' actions. Through their church families, NACW members could develop community bonds and set agendas specific to their locale. They faced discrimination within the larger suffrage movement, but found solace by helping to organize in 1909 the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Persons, or the NAACP. Unfortunately, the passage of the 19th Amendment would not clear a path for themselves and their families to vote, as barriers such as poll taxes, grandfather clauses, and threats of violence would not only keep African Americans from voting, but even from registering to vote. This photograph shows the strength in numbers gathering at the 1933 World's Fair Century of Progress in Chicago. In the 1930s and the 1940s, the NACW continued to involve themselves in political protests with a new generation of members. They joined the calls for congressional anti-lynching bills and used public protests to do so. Their national unity is evident in these photographs from the 1946 protest in front of the White House gates, showing picket representatives from all 48 states. And they also continued to be very active throughout the 20th century, but in the 1950s to advocate for the Supreme Court, the ultimate Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education. They took as a key project the family, and they were focused on, again, on that lifting as we climb. This year, we have been celebrating the 100th anniversary of the women's voting rights. But as we can see from the examples of the National Women's Party and the National Association of Colored Women, the amendment did not provide a panacea for oppressive conditions faced by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The decision on Wednesday in Kentucky to not charge the police officers who shot Breonna Taylor is one more example of why voting rights for women did not solve inequities in the United States. What we perhaps can celebrate is that we know so much more about the diverse people and actions that took to secure the most basic of citizen rights. But it is up to us to actually use those rights. So I end my formal presentation with a call to exercise your vote for this election cycle and those going forward. So I'm going to end my slides, and I believe that I need to end the stop screening, or did you do that for me, Pat?
It's all good, Dr. Ciani.
Okay, all right,
it's all
good.
Yeah.
So I just want to emphasize that I, as a active member of the League of Women Voters, I always support people engaging in their right to the vote, and I encourage all of you, everybody out there who's listening tonight, to please do so. You can go to the League of Women Voters website, and they have a good overview of how you can vote by mail, how you can vote in person, how you can vote ahead of time, pre-voting, so that we have a lot of options in our COVID-dominated environment right now. But we need to vote. We need to cast that vote.
Oh, yeah.
In my humble opinion.
It's a big year, in the commemoration of the 19th Amendment, as we've mentioned, but it's also a big year in terms of the election. Very, very important to vote. Yes. Yeah, but that was a great presentation, Dr.
Oh, thanks.
So much
Thanks.
for that, and the images. I was thinking, and I saw there was a comment in the comment section, and Sarah hit right on what I was thinking. The picture from the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum of the NACW and the large group of women at the World's Fair, I believe you said. It's a powerful image.
Isn't that beautiful? I just love that image.
Yeah.
So I don't need to share I don't want to go back to sharing the screen again. I just want to yes, it is from the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. You might see this image in an edited version. This is how I first saw it a few years ago, but the panorama, that's the beauty of that image, and that's the power to see those women who are all ages. There are children in that photograph. And so these women were bringing their children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews to these events and to these to activities like the Century of Progress. And I think that that's a really important legacy for the National Association of Colored Women, is that they really stressed the importance of the Black family, and that they were countering so many stereotypes that painted them as deviant. And I love seeing these images that show them in the same dress and in the same mannerisms as a white middle-class woman with her family. So I think we need to, I just want to encourage people, and if there are any educators out there, that, use an image like this one from the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library to talk about the 1930s and the Century of Progress, to talk about Chicago, right? The go-to is too much to use the tried and true white middle-class family. But I think that we need to always bring in those, not just the diverse voices, but the diverse images, or I should say the images of diverse peoples.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. And I really appreciated, Dr. Ciani, you discussed the history of each one of those images, but, in each one of those, and before and after the presentation, all of the, actions that can be taken, right now to further this work. Whether you're an educator or you're just an average citizen, so much can be done, and so much still needs to be done in order to get to a better place. So,
yeah, and I think that too many times the suffrage movement becomes a day or the week in a syllabus, and it's like, okay, now we're going to, if you're learning about the 19th century, it's like, oh, it's Seneca Falls Day. And if you're learning about the Progressive Era, oh, okay, it's Suffrage Day. And the reality is that these individuals were activists for voting rights, but also for a much larger set of citizen rights, and also immigrant rights. So even if someone wasn't eligible to vote, a lot of the activists that are involved in these organizations were interested and concerned for the place of the immigrant in the United States, and that still is true today. And I think that we need to embrace voting rights as a starting point for understanding a lot of very important controversies and episodes, many of which are traumatic. But I can see visualizing a middle school social studies lesson or a high school, junior high or high school lesson around the theme of voting rights. And so then that would take you not just to a particular time period, but it would show you the long view of the vote of the problems attached to voting rights. And it gets kids talking about today. And I think that that's really important.
Oh, yeah.
I know they got to take their exam and you got to prep them for, don't get me started on that. You got to prep them for the standards. I understand all of that. I'm not arguing to not do that. But you can throw in some nuggets along the way that are important nuggets of history. And I'm using the word nugget because I would like for them to become boulders, right? Right now, they're just little, pebbles and nuggets of these little factoids that someone might win on a night of Jeopardy. We need to understand the complexity of these issues.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's very complex. And I like how you mentioned the, voting rights and suffragist history, that is being focused on, but there's so much crossover with other histories, and it's not held in a vacuum. And like you said, it's a good point to maybe discuss some other things as well. So I appreciate that.
And I think working class rights, you can connect suffrage to the workers' rights and the abilities of workers to make change in their lives, especially during some of these periods of traumas like the Great Depression, and you can make that connection to many families who are struggling today with the pandemic. And so one of the things I always encourage K through 12 educators to do is to make that linkage from history to the present. And it resonates with kids, I think, but it also resonates with their parents. I no longer have someone in, she's an educator now, so I no longer have anybody in college either. So I don't necessarily know, the parents are my age group, we're the grandmas now, right? So we want our grandchildren and our friends' grandchildren, we want them to understand that this history is relevant, and the way that you can make it relevant for them is to connect to today's problems and today's organizations, right? We have a lot of children who are being severely influenced by they see and they hear on a regular basis that the people that black young people are being murdered in the streets. And so I think that we can make those ties for them to understanding how this long legacy of voting oppression. And then they can start, their wheels are going to start to turn. And I think that that's really important for all children, all adolescents, to hear those histories, really, again, make it relevant for them.
Oh yeah, yeah. Relevance is key. I mean, even
Mhm.
in this exhibit space and with the photos
Yeah.
that you were showing in the presentation, you see those photos of those protests, and it seems so familiar, to 2020, and things that we're seeing today.
Yes.
And
Yes.
students will identify that. They'll see that, oh, that looks like something I saw on TV or
Right.
on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever else, and showing them why this matters now
Mhm.
is very important, as you say. Um,
The women, the National Women's Party members who were jailed for their activism, I think that's something that is could be taught in, not in elementary or middle school, but certainly high school students. I think would really they would really grab on, that would hold resonance for them, um, because it really showed uh, they were in that workhouse for too many months without getting a hearing, and I think that young people will understand, because that's still continuing to happen in terms of so many groups, oppressed communities who are dealing with incarcerations, long years and years of incarceration. So I think that there's lots of ways. I didn't talk about everything. Another fun thing is the automobile tours that the National Women's Party members took, and I wanted to make a comment about that because the National Association of Colored Women couldn't do something like that because of the racism that they would encounter as they would have driven across the country. So the whiteness of the National Women's Party allowed them to engage in this very important but fun activity of the automobile tours. So I think that even when we think about strategies, um, our racist culture, it's really embed. The structural racism is also it also influences how someone is able to take action. So the National Association of Colored Women really connected with their churches, and they connected with their family locations, their community locations. And, that's that's out of necessity because of because of the segregated world in which they lived. So I meant to emphasize that. And I didn't have it written down, see, but it came to me.
I think you mentioned earlier, you could do an entire presentation, or we've talked about, we could do an entire exhibit on, this. I think you mentioned like the suffrage parade of 1913. You could do
Oh,
an
yeah.
entire presentation on that. You could do an entire presentation on, the work of NACW, a handful of
Yes.
presentations, but
Yes. And it would be,
time and space is
I
unfortunately
know.
not infinite. So
Yeah. Yeah. It would be, but I think if you're thinking, I'm just going to throw a couple of ideas out, Pat,
yeah.
for future exhibitions. But have you done something with Brown versus Board of Education?
Um,
Do you do you
it's
know?
possible it's been used in the museum's history,
Mhm.
but I'm not quite sure. But
Yeah,
I'll look into that.
but I'm thinking that you could do something with Black education and the long history. I mean, we think about this pivotal law ruling by the Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. But I think it's also important, and of course, I'm going to do a shout out for your research that you did in my class last semester. There's a history among our institutions University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Illinois State University, Eastern, Western, Northern, uh, um, inviting African American students into their communities, but not always having the support systems in place once those students began to arrive. And I know your work was in the focused on the 1960s, but there's a lot of, I'm thinking that, and I told you this then, but I'm thinking there's one of the elements of the National Association of Colored Women is that there were so many college-educated women among their membership. And I think that would be a very interesting tie-in to look at how historically Black colleges have elevated the educational system for Black children. And so that, just a thought. And that, of course, comes through voting rights.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, we've got, being so close to Champaign-Urbana, we've got Champaign Unit 4 schools and Urbana USD 116 and a number of other local school districts that I'm sure there's a lot of rich educational history impacts of, local impacts of, large pieces of legislation and court cases such as Brown v. Board. Our director's tuning in, Barb. She said, no, we haven't done an exhibit on Brown v. Board, but maybe we should.
Okay.
Maybe we'll look at it in the future. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Barb.
Speaking of that, I was gonna, if it's okay, I think we have a handful of questions so far.
Sure.
And if you do have any questions, if you haven't done so already, put it down in the comment section below, and we'll see if we can address them. A few other shout outs as well too. I just wanted to mention Jenna here. She says she's watching from Bend.
Hi, Jenna. Jenna's a former student.
Yeah, so thanks for tuning in, Jenna. And she also has a question a little bit later. I'll get down to that as well too. Sarah had tuned in or had mentioned references to books and reading lists. You had mentioned possibly compiling one if that's not too difficult.
I will do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you can email it to me, and I put my email in the comment section. If anybody who is interested, once I get that reading list, then I can then forward it to those folks who are interested.
Absolutely.
Another shout out to Talisha, forgive me, watching from Glen Carbon, former student as well.
Hi, Talisha. I miss you guys. Oh gosh.
That's the silver lining.
You guys are going to get me to cry yet tonight.
We're doing virtual programming because we can't do in person, but I guess there are a few silver linings with this, changeover to a virtual world. We get to stream these programs and, our access, folks who may not be able to always access us for in-person programs can tune in virtually. So
yeah.
Glad to have you tune in, Talisha.
Talisha wrote an amazing master's thesis on Black women in the military. She graduated, I think it's been, I think it's 4 years now, Talisha. And she's doing great stuff. Miss you. Love seeing your name.
Our director, Barb, she said, in researching the exhibit, I was overwhelmed by the number of local women involved in the suffrage movement, but had a hard time finding local women of color in traditional sources. Any ideas for other sources, Dr. Ciani?
Yeah, I'm going to do a quick, I'm going to do a quick look in Professor Jones' book and see if there is a category for Illinois, and I'm not seeing one, but you know what, Barb, let me email a couple of people. The National Woman's Party Archives actually might have something. Now, when you say and the National Archives may have something. Did you look there?
I think she looked at those, some of the big, she looked at quite a few resources I know,
Okay.
like National Archives, Library of Congress, other, those large federal institutions, and and a whole bunch of local sources. I know she scoured tons of resources, but
Yeah.
that was something having a hard time discovering.
So you, where is your, I'm assuming that your area has a local chapter of the National Association of Colored Women. And so they may have their own local archive. So that might be a possibility. But let me think about this. If you've already scoured the League of Women Voters records, of course, that was some of those are at the McLean County Museum of History, and they do have their a Black History project. And I'm wondering, did you talk with Susan Hartsold at the McLean County? That might be a question for Barb.
Sure.
Because
she said we do, I think possibly in reference to local chapter of
the NACW
and other things.
Yeah. Okay. Barb, I'm going to do a little bit of research, and Pat's going to give me your email, and we'll have we can have a conversation.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. Laura said New York Times had online presentation, Finish the Fight, which was a play highlighting 5 diverse leaders for women's suffrage. It was excellent and hopefully can still be viewed. Highly recommend.
Yeah, fabulous. That was fabulous.
Yeah.
I have to say also that PBS has been running I think it was a 4-part series called The Vote, and that was running this week. So there's, and the National Archives and the Library of Congress exhibitions are also incredibly diverse. They have a lot of different diverse activists in those sites. So I recommend hitting those up too.
Yeah, there's a lot of
there's so much good information out there right now.
And there's a lot of good digital sources that you can access anywhere with an internet connection.
Yes.
These virtual exhibit tours. We've got one. Our director Barb did we did a program, narrated a tour of the space back behind me, the special exhibit. So that's on our Facebook and YouTube page if anyone's interested. But yeah, those other institutions that you mentioned, they've got some really great digital sources, and their online exhibits are really awesome.
Yeah.
Let's see. Talisha, I'm sorry, said miss you too. So she's still tuning in. And Laura said it'd be great to focus on local school integration efforts in response to Brown v. Board. That would be interesting.
I think I've just organized your next major exhibit, Barb and Pat.
There we go.
Sorry about that.
There we go. Amanda, one of
oh, hi, Amanda.
This was phenomenal. Love to have the email with the reading list. I'll have to send
okay.
Too.
You got it.
And Barb said that she'd be happy to talk about that too. So
did Jenna have a question?
Oh, she did. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I missed that. Dr. Ciani at the end of her presentation, do you see efforts like Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight organization as part of this lineage of Black women voting activists?
Yeah, great question, Jenna. I do. That's the short answer is I do. I see that there's a thread, there's a really powerful thread from the 1830s to today. And so there are so many important conversations that Black women have introduced to the media in the last few years. I don't know if you follow PBS, but Yamiche Alcindor, I think, is an amazing reporter, and part of the problem, I saw the example, I should say we all saw the example with Yamiche and then also with Stacey Abrams, is that they're often victims, or I should say survivors, of entrenched racism. And so I think that one of the strengths of Black women voting activists is that they just didn't give up in the face of racism. And that is a continuing effort and a continuing struggle. And, those of us who are not Black can't embody the struggle that those Black women voting activists did have then and continue to do so. Stacey Abrams deserves a lot of respect for that Fair Fight organization. And I thank you for asking that question. I wanted to emphasize that Jenna is a doctor. She's Dr. Goldsmith. She did her English degree at Illinois State, and she was a Women and Genders Studies minor, and she was also in the English department's master's program. And last year she was a young alum. She received one of the young fabulous alums of ISU award. So we're pretty proud of Jenna.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in tonight, Jenna, and everyone else for tuning in for the program. That seems to be all the questions that we have, but I really appreciate the program, Dr. Ciani, and then all of, the other awesome resources and, points of action that folks can take, related to the talk tonight. And thanks everybody for tuning in out there as well. Do you have any final words for the virtual audience out there, Dr. Ciani?
Well, first of all, Pat, one of these days you're going to call me Kyle. Oh. You it's okay. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Habits, So,
yeah, I know. It's okay. I answer to it. I'll answer to Dr. Ciani. I'll answer to Kyle. Some people call me Dr. Kyle. But I think my final, I'm going to go back to how I ended the presentation, is that we need to vote. If you're eligible to vote, please cast that vote. I also want us to I'm going to be casting my vote in the name of Breonna Taylor this year. And I want us to think about how we can honor the women who have been murdered, the victims of domestic violence, victims of police violence, victims of racial violence, and that's how I'm going to be voting. So I encourage you to join me in that. Thanks for having me. It was really fun, and it was great to see everybody.
Yeah, it was good to see you, and it's good to see other former students tuning in. Other folks out there in the audience. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. And as you said, get out there and vote. It's probably one of the more patriotic things you can do, and I think one of our highest civic duties that we need to do. So get out there and vote. I think early voting started where we are today. So get out there and vote. Learn where your polling place is. Learn how to register if you aren't registered. So
yeah, there you go.
But again, thanks everybody. Thanks to Dr.
Thank you.
And everybody enjoy the rest of your night, and hope you can join us for more virtual programs in the future.
Great. Bye-bye.